Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Pangolin Advisor introducing the Vanir DLC to Songs of Conquest. That's right, the last video I made about this game was 2 years ago, and that was also the last video I have made in total, but this DLC is definitely well worth a comeback. It is a great game, the Songs of Conquest I mean, and it's in fact my second most played game on Steam this year. I think we should cheer to that. Thank you, yeah. So anyway, in this video I'm going to introduce this DLC to you and tell you all about the new faction, new assets, new maps, and of course the units and heroes in that given faction. So without any further ado, let us get right into it, shall we? So what does this DLC actually give you? Well, it gives you access to a new faction, the Vanir, the 5th faction in the game, so it's a very big increase. It's an increase by, what, 25% from the original 4, so I much appreciate it. The 4 factions were quite enough to make this game amazing, but another faction is a breath of fresh air I definitely appreciate. You also get a bunch of new maps. You get 2 challenge maps and also 6 conquest maps. And of course you also get a bunch of new tile sets, a new tile set, new tiles, new areas on the map. I already mentioned those and I'll showcase them in a second. When you talk about the Vanir, of course you have to talk about the units first. As is with any faction, you have to talk about its roster. And I have to say I'm very much so in love with the Vanir roster. It's very aggressive, it's very dynamic, it's quick to get into the enemy lines, and it's probably the best unit roster when it comes to unit positioning specifically. I'm not saying it's the strongest per se, it's that it's the most mobile and the most disruptive to your enemy while giving you plenty of control. And for that, well, the DLC has only been out for a couple of days, but Vanir might be my favorite new faction actually. So let's talk about the units one by one. You start off with the Licht, the flying minstrels, the pixie spirits, however you want to call them, and the Licht Van, their upgrade. And I'll talk about them both at once because they're very similar. They are both musicians. Every faction has their musician, and I'm pleased to say these are probably my favorite musicians. Because unlike musicians from early on Love or Baria, they actually feel meaty when it comes to their damage potential, especially when you think about their upgrade. I'll show that in a second. Their song is fairly nice. I like getting extra offense to my units, and if you have a lot of them, you can also very easily just use them as powerful damage dealers, especially if you consider their amazing upgrade that at final level gives them double strike, which is very devastating. And of course earlier levels also increase their damage, which is again very impactful. So you can easily use them as minstrels, musicians in early game, keep massing their numbers, and then in the late game suddenly turn them into absolute lawnmowers. And it's beautiful. I love it. Another unit that you have available is Huskarl, which is a unit I don't care about at all. And this is probably a good moment to talk a bit about the whole gimmick with the Vanir. They have a split. Some of the units start off as humans, like this Huskarl over here, but if you upgrade them, they instead become the Vildra. They're like the shapeshifted humans. They're no longer humans, they're much cooler. Now, there's a lot of ups and downs about this. Basically, they are a bit asymmetrical, they're not strict upgrades, they change in their form a lot, so you actually have some incentive to keep some of your units unupgraded, at least for a while. So, you can see right here that the Huskarl has 2 destruction essence, he's got guard and shielded, so he's a very defensive unit that has a single ranged attack. Interesting, this ability hasn't been introduced earlier in the game, and this guy has his uses. However, you can also upgrade him to give him more troop movement, arcane essence, and finally magic resistance. making him a little bit tankier, although even then still not the tankiest unit, so gotta keep that in mind. It's also a unit I wouldn't mind not having at all, because I'll always instantly skip them to get my beloved Coffans. The Ravens, the walking Ravens. I love Ravens. I've never talked about it really, but I think Ravens are amazing. They're cool, intelligent, and oh, just gotta love them. So the Coffan are incredible backstabby type of unit. They have a good movement, and they have an ability I've been wishing to add to Songs of Conquest since the game even came out, really. The leap ability. Something I felt like flying units such as dragons should have had, and now the Coffins have it. It's basically flight. And you can pick any hex in range and just jump over to it, and you're there. And you can use this for a whole range of effects. You can escape area of effect, rather, you can use it to escape the areas protected by your enemy. So if moving would cost you attack of opportunity, it doesn't cost attack of opportunity if you leap out of that area. You can leap into things like enemy walls to cause havoc. Those guys are amazing, especially with the right hero, and there's my favorite hero that gives them backstab. So, a very, very nice unit. Next up we've got the swine line, and as it's called, this regular swine, probably not the best. I mean, the idea is interesting. It's a decently mobile tank. It has a lot of health, decent defense. It also deals some damage. It's not to be underestimated, but it's fairly difficult to get to. In order to get the swine, you have to get a tier 2 house and upgrade it as well, so it takes a while. But when you get it, you have a unit. It gives you 1 destruction, not that incredible. What's really nice and interesting is its upgrade, the Serminan, or however you're supposed to pronounce it. It has the bull rush ability, which in itself is already decent, but more interestingly, it has the eternal ability, allowing you to use it in probably late game, let's face it, as the unending tide of defenders. So if you have a city you want to defend and have your main army somewhere far away, just keep filling your city with those Seminan, and even if you lose a lot of them, you can replace them. Or alternatively, if you have an army that has the Seminan in it, use them as tanks without even caring a little bit about their livelihoods. Just set them in to get slaughtered to protect your more valuable units, and then you can buy them back at your nearest city, which is actually very powerful if you have the economy to support it. So definitely a late game unit, but very useful in late game. Next we've got the Berserkir. The Berserkir are berserkers, as you may expect. There's not much to say about that. They hit hard, especially if they rage. They get slaughtered if they're berserked, and they're fairly useful or well-rounded unit, I would say. Their upgrades are very similar actually. Like, this is the least asymmetric upgrade we've had this far, I think, and it gives them the challenge ability. Incredible ability. Again, yet another ability focused on positioning. It allows you to draw an enemy to you. It does give the enemy first strike, so when you challenge an enemy, the enemy walks up over to you, attacks you, and then the skin shifters counterattack. So it does cost you. However, you can use it, for instance, to lure out enemy ranged unit out of the enemy lines, force an enemy to walk outside of their walls through their gate. Plenty of useful abilities. So this is actually, it turns from like a male frontline unit into a mix of frontline / support unit of sorts. And again, focused on mobility. In this case, anti-mobility for enemy. Very nice. Trolls are adorable and no harm should come to them, and they're also very powerful actually. They start with a rock they can hurl, and they have a fish they can use in melee, which is actually my first achievement from this DLC, to win a combat with a fish. So yeah, that's a thing, literally. You can actually see their fish. So the trolls are the only proper ranged unit you have, and they're tier 2 unit. So it takes a while for you to get them, and they don't have the biggest range. It's not bad either, honestly, but they do hit very hard, so they fulfill plenty of roles. and their upgrades, the Grim, they're actually trolls on steroids that don't care if the enemy walks up to them. It's an interesting ability. You can basically have the Grim shell the enemy with rocks, and if the enemy tries to block them, they just pull out their logs, their trees actually, and they're suddenly monsters in melee fight. Or you can mix this up. You can, for instance, walk forward a little bit with the trees, clear out a unit, then start using ranged mode to attack somebody you don't necessarily want to strike in melee. That being said, the Grim in melee, there are no pushovers. There are not many units that can stand up to them once they're in their alternative mode, which again pushes Vanir as a primarily melee faction, which is totally okay when you consider how many mobility options they have. Another unit is the Baka Horse. It's a charging, tanky unit, so another fast and tanky unit in the roster, similar to the Swine, except definitely better at everything the Swine does, except for this, whole resurrection thing. The interesting thing is when you upgrade the Baka Horse to a Hunger, it gets the feed ability. So it's another way for you to keep your main army far away from home and keep it without any losses. So basically you send in the Hunger draws aggro from the enemy units and is getting attacked, but it can then use the feed ability to heal itself, thus not causing you any losses. So it's a very nice perpetuum mobile, I would say. Then we have the Crone. Probably, when it's upgraded, I'll actually just talk about its upgrade straight away. When it's upgraded, it's probably I would say the best unit in the roster. Like with the Raven hero that has a specific ability for the Kofan, I think Kofan are amazing and possibly the best. But without taking heroes into account, Nornor, the upgraded Crone, is absolute slayer of words. It's incredible. So Nornor has the improved Raven form, which the Crone has without the improvement, which allows it to teleport to any square, attack an enemy and come back. It's like the Harpies from Heroes of Might and Magic, except the range is infinite. The enemy can be behind walls, well protected, you'll still get to that enemy and come back. And if you provoke no counterattack, oh, it's incredible. You can eliminate any pesky range units. So again, cementing even further the theme of mobility for the Vanir and their lack of need for ranged units, which is why they only have one ranged unit that is also partially a melee unit. Because for instance, you have the Nornor that just can get anywhere you want. You don't really care about having more ranged unit if you have those witches, because that's really what they are. Next up, we've got the Chieftains. And these are probably my favorite human units of the roster. I've actually deliberately been not upgrading them to keep them in my army, because they are very cheap to get actually. Probably the easiest unit, the easiest tier 3 unit to switch into out of all the factions, because they building their structure only costs you wood and ore, and gold obviously. So they're easy to get, and what you get is a fairly bulky unit with decent offense and defense. Not amazing by any stretch, but they also have inspiring and strengthen and sweeping attacks. I don't even care much about the sweeping attacks, but just having like a stack of those units in the middle of your other units, giving them inspiring and strengthen, is really helping your army a lot. Is it better than having like a proper stack of other units? I'm not sure, but I like the vibe of the Chieftains. It's definitely an interesting ability. I mean, idea to have them used as like the buffer, like to have your final unit be a support unit essentially. But you can upgrade them to absolute monsters, literally, by turning them into Yorm, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. And this changes them to your classic final unit type of unit. So they get the intimidating, most tier 3 units have that. And they also have the Slam ability, which is an aerial effect doomsday device, essentially. If you have a Yorm walk up to an army that is in a tight formation, this is definitely better than sweeping attacks. This causes absolute havoc. Sure, it can also kill your own army, but all in all, it's a very terrifying unit to face. I think, because I actually haven't fought against Vanir yet, I only played as them, and they are terrifying. In terms of upgrades, I have talked a bit about a few of them, but I'll briefly introduce all of the upgrades for you. First of all, with the units, we talked about the Vildra slash whatever this human is upgrades. I don't really care about magic resistance on my ravens, honestly. The troop movement is very nice and Arcana Essence is useful. Magic resistance is like a cherry on top that's decent in certain circumstances, but also entirely skippable. For the swine, you have extra initiative and HP, and of course the Eternal ability, which is the ability I talked about that really makes them incredible. Now the thing is, I only just now noticed that you have the ability to give them Eternal, which I assume implies that it gives it to the swine because the upgraded swine already have Eternal. I've seen that. I didn't purchase the upgrade and they had it already. So I'm not sure if this is like a changed idea for the tech, if this Eternal Ethereal was only... Oh, it's Ethereal, not Eternal! I cannot read. Yeah, Ethereal, not Eternal. Entirely different. Ethereal allows them to ignore zone of influence, right? I believe it does. We could double check. No, actually that was not this ability. I don't remember what Ethereal does, I'm sorry, I couldn't find it. Let's continue then. Embrace Fury, extra troop movement for Berserker, always useful to have that on a melee unit. Destruction Essence and Controlled Berserker as well, pretty useful for this entire line. The Great Deeds, extra troop movement and Destruction Essence to your biggest units. And the Frontline Fighter. This turns in your Yorm into, terrifying powerhouses that you have to kill from afar, because if they get to your army, you have no army, let's just put it this way. Then you've got some more Vildra troop improvements and the Lethal Licht. 1 damage, we already talked about this. The Gloomy Essence gives more Chaos and Arcana Essence to Trolls and Grim, not bad, and also shielded, so you can't fight them up close because they are well defended against that, and you can't fight them from a distance because they are well defended against that as well. All in all, makes trolls into how you imagine trolls to be, very difficult to get rid of. I appreciate that. Feed the Hunger, more Destruction Essence to back up horses and Hunger, and more tool movement. Honestly, they have so much movement, they don't necessarily need it that much, but Frightful is nice to debuff your enemies a little bit. I don't mind that, it's decent upgrades. And then Sleep and Stitch, so extra damage and initiative to your Crones and Nonor, very useful. And then Charge Essence to Crone and Nonor, probably the least useful ability you can give them, unless you only have like 1 in your army, because with their infinite range of attack and their ability to not provoke retaliation once they're upgraded, you always want to attack with your Nonor, always. A single round not having them when you don't have them attack the enemy is a round wasted in almost every situation, so it's a pretty useless upgrade in my opinion. When it comes to other upgrades, we've got Human Research, the Heart of Winter, the Swift Raiders, and the Deeds Unsung. None of these I find particularly useful unless you're playing with the variant of the game which allows you to mix factions, because you usually don't want to have a lot of humans in your army. And then you have Vildra Research. I find it a lot better, which gives your units, you can see what it gives you: the Vildra's Malice, the Vildra's Vengeance, and also the Vildra's Defiance. All of these very useful, especially since they're gonna apply to practically your entire army, making this probably the most useful line of research out of all factions in the game, because most of them don't have as many units that can benefit from a single faction, from a single line of research. Maybe the Rana. I would have to count it though. The Sweat Lodge is very standard. It's like any economic research for any other faction. It gives them the Amber, and there are 3 primary schools of magic: Arcane, Chaotic, and Destructive. Destruction, that's what it gives them. So as with any faction, you have 9 heroes to choose from, 3 from each category. And as you can see, I'm only using 2 factions in this game. It was a bit of a warm-up game, but it's a pretty good game to showcase those heroes. So let's go and talk about them one by one. So we have 3 humans. First one is the Ildra Vatnadotir. I don't think I should read those names, honestly. And she's one of the forced heroes in one of the other maps, which is another topic I will get to. And she gives extra damage to your Berserker and his kin shifters. All in all, it's not a bad hero. Those units are fairly decent, and I have nothing but to say about her. Another is Jan Steadfast, and he gives more HP to human troops. Now, this is a bit of a controversial hero in my opinion, because as I mentioned, humans for these factions are unupgraded versions of units. They are different to Vanir, they work differently, but in most cases they are weaker, and if you want to have humans in your faction, it's either not by choice, or you just sprinkle them a little bit to fill the holes of your faction. So having a hero dedicated to human is not ideal unless you're playing with the variant of this game, which allows you to have mixed units, for instance with Arleon or Love factions alongside Vanir. Then this guy gets a lot stronger, I think. And with the last human hero, we've got Cold Blacknest. And he starts with taxes. I like heroes that start with taxes. Obviously my hero is leveled up, he starts with level 1 taxes. He also has extra troop movement, which is actually a very powerful ability. And out of all the heroes in the game that have both taxes and movement, this is probably the first one that I would have a hard time deciding if I want to use him in combat, because troop movement is very powerful, or if I just want to use him as a spotter hero, because taxes is a great skill on a, you know, secondary hero that's just there to carry your units for you. Then we have a bunch of other heroes that are human stand into Vildra, so the shifters. We've got Bjorn Oakbreaker, and he gives you units more spell damage resistance, always good to have, but more importantly he starts with a bunch of already leveled units, which is both a curse and a blessing, because it's gonna be tricky for you to get him extra units at the start. So quite an unwieldy hero to start with, perhaps. We've got Gorm Elgrim, who is starting with Chaos Essence and Destruction Magic, so definitely magic skilled hero. Again, starting with upgraded units, but only a single stack of those, so it's probably more manageable. He's also present in one of the maps I already played. And then we've got the Night Dweller. My favorite hero thus far, well, you can tell by the fact that in this map I already have him on level 15, and I'll probably keep using him many times. He gives Backstabber ability to Kolfan. And he does start with Scouting, which is not my favorite ability, but it does have some uses, especially in larger maps. But the Backstabber to Kolfan, let's just put it this way, if you want to use Kolfan, the Ravens, I'm sorry, you definitely want this hero. And I love Ravens, so that's a natural choice. And then we've got the Vildra, the raw Vildra heroes. They have never been human, they are just their own things. So we've got Griget, I have no idea how to pronounce his name. He starts with channeling, some more damage power, and more gold looted after battle. A pretty decent hero as your main hero. Also starts with a decent army that has some unupgraded units, so it's gonna be fairly easy to switch into. Next we've got the Hemd, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. Starts with more spell damage power and Arcana, again a very powerful combo. Also I didn't mention the 13 movement speed on a hero, also pretty decent. Starts with a single banker horse. That's gonna be tricky to get more of, but a single banker horse is very tanky, so it's okay. And also 2 crones, amazing units, so it's always good to start. However, might be a bit tricky early on because you'll suffer from lack of space in your army. And Sorg. Sorg is adorable, I love Sorg. He lost his stone, he's sad, so you need to give him plenty of love and respect. He starts with a Troll and an upgraded Troll, the Grim. So again, gonna be a bit tricky in the early game. You're gonna have to go for Trolls early, most likely, to make full use of him. Starts with Archery and Range Specialization. tricky, because since the Vanir have only a single ranged unit, you probably don't necessarily care much about ranged offense. So this hero is probably very good if you play with the variant that lets you mix factions, but if you're playing with just the Vanir, this guy is adorable, but maybe not the strongest. Unless you just max him out with trolls. So what do I feel about this faction and their units in general? I think I already mentioned this once or twice already. They're amazing. Their positioning abilities let them do whatever they please on the battlefield. They feel so satisfying to use, they're so slick, and especially against the AI that doesn't comprehend their nimbleness. It's like you can have battles that in auto-resolve are crushing defeats, and then you can just annihilate the enemy because of how mobile this faction is to a degree the AI can't comprehend. A human would probably defend better against the Vanir, but when you play against AI, it's just such a joy to stomp the enemy, I cannot deny it. When it comes to the maps you get with this DLC, I already mentioned there are a few of those. Now the thing is, you may be wondering how big these are, and as you can see they are not that big, they're fairly small. We've got some 2v2s, a single player map, a 3-player map, 4-player map and a 5-player map. All of these maps are really tiny, only the Go East map, which I've been showing the most in the background, is medium size. It does have some very topography, it's very interesting, a very beautiful map. And I can say the same thing about most of these maps, but if you're looking for size, you're gonna get middling size at most with this particular set of maps. So I already played a few of those, not all of them, I might get to that at some point, but I'm already switching back into community-made maps. So the good news is that the community exists, there's a lot of custom maps out there to download, and that includes 2 of my own published maps, which I'm going to shamelessly plug here, the King of the Mountain, as well as the Heart of Desires. I recommend them because I made them. I'm also currently working on a 3rd map that actually uses the Vanir stuff, and I'll use this segue as an opportunity to talk a little bit about the kind of assets you can expect from your maps. So I popped into the map editor for a second to give you a brief overview of the new assets that you can experience with this Vanir DLC. I also have to mention that currently there's an issue where the rain appears to be gone, as well as thunder and wind effects from the game, but we do now have snowfall, which is something we didn't have before. And here you can see all of the new tiles. So like this is the new Vanir tile set. We've got the arid, dry, temperate and wet tiles. And the interesting thing is that the wet tiles actually have snow on them, as you can see, but they also have some effect on the other tiles, or rather not tiles but objects on the map. So if you can see, if I expand the snow rather, not the sand, the trees are actually going to get the snow on them. Now this only applies to regular trees, the bad trees and other trees don't care about this as far as I'm aware, and neither do the... oh, I didn't want to do that. Neither do these extra blockers. I had them shown here so that you can see the type of blockers you can experience, the extra lighting sources. And the interesting thing is, with this new tile set, you actually have some old buildings change forms. So you may be familiar, for instance, with the good old, where is it? That's the experience one. Crumbling Tower, for instance. That's how it usually looks like, you can see over here, but if I place it on a Vanir tile, it changes look. A very nice nifty touch. It's a structure you can know and recognize, but it looks a bit different. The Crumbling Monument, it used to be a head, and now it's a donut. And yeah, those are the 3 objects I've seen thus far that do this. There are also a few entirely new objects. The Petrified Troll I'm really excited about, because we didn't have anything that gave us 10 defense, and we did have 10 offense buildings, such as the Sunken Statue. The Deed Stone is another new thing, the Vildra Stone, and the Cauldron, which gives you a ton of movement, which I believe is going to be a very useful tool, especially on huge maps. Next up, we've got some new areas where you can get treasure. So we've got the Den of the Vildra, as well as the Imperial Mound. So again, interesting stuff, definitely nice to have. And in general, I think this tile set looks really neat. It's going to work very well when complemented with other sets. Be that early on, if you want to like mix this kind of fresh spring and harsh winter vibes, or even perhaps Sloth is also an interesting take on mixing this. If you want to go for more of the kind of harsh autumn vibes, where you've got those two really nicely blended tile sets. So definitely appreciate that a lot. So all in all, I think this DLC is absolutely fantastic. And if you have had any enjoyment in Songs of Conquest, I highly recommend you get that. And if you've never played Songs of Conquest, well then you should. You definitely should. It's an amazing game. It's the best spiritual successor to Heroes of Might and Magic ever, in my opinion. It's got a bunch of new ideas that other Heroes wannabes didn't think about. They just were stuck in the past. And I know that there is this whole new Heroes of Might and Magic game announced, which is all fun and games, but honestly, if you're nostalgic for games like Heroes of Might and Magic 3, Songs of Conquest, in my opinion, does more than just appease your nostalgia. It gives you that which you miss, and gives you a lot more in a fresh, new reimagining of what the formula for the genre can be. So I highly recommend that. It doesn't mean you have to replace that. I still play the Heroes games from time to time, although Songs of Conquest is probably my favorite of this type of games, which is saying something for a person that played probably thousands of hours of Heroes. So I should also mention, it's a good moment to mention, I did actually receive the key for this DLC from the developer for some reason. If you're listening to this, well, thank you. I have no idea why you chose me in particular, and I was probably going to get that DLC anyway, but it probably wouldn't push me to make a video about it, so that definitely did give me a kick to do that. And it's nice. It's nice making a video again, so thank you doubly. I did get the supported edition, just, you know, as a thank you, and it's nice because it does give you the two colors and some birds, which unfortunately do not apply for the Vanir units, but that's okay. Anywho, this video is long enough. Thank you very much for watching. You might be wondering if you can expect more videos from me, and the honest answer is I have no idea. I just felt like making this video because of the Lava Potion, the team behind Songs of Conquest. And usually I'm too busy with my real life to make videos anymore, unfortunately, but I may come back to it at some point if I feel like it. I'm not gonna promise that. I made promises in the past I wasn't able to keep. I don't want to make this mistake again, so you may or may not expect more videos from me. If I ever start a series, then I'll try to make it consistent, but right now, that's all from me. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you online.